It is Monday, May 5th. We are in day 9,000 of the retrial of Karen Read, and we are resuming with the Commonwealth's witness on the stand. They finished Jen McCabe's testimony on Friday. That was something. And we are back with the laboratory supervisor who is talking about blood alcohol and blood alcohol conversions. This is the process of taking the blood alcohol serum test that was done at the hospital for medical purposes for Karen Read. Later, those results were taken to the state crime lab, and they take the results, like the paper with the results, take the paper with the results, and then run it through a number of conversions to come up with a blood alcohol conversion at the time the blood was taken at 9 o'clock, a little after in the morning on January 29th, and then a retrograde extrapolation, which gives you a range at the time of driving. The Commonwealth, when they originally asked the crime lab to do this, pinned that time of driving at 12:45. We know that that timeline is going to have to shift by about 10 minutes or so, which for this case is incredibly significant because minutes and the timeline in this case are going to matter very much when you look at all the cell phone data, but we are only at the tip of all of the cell phone data. We haven't gotten into the rest of it yet, so we will see all the rest of that data as it comes in. Here are my curiosities for the week. Are we going to get to law enforcement witnesses this week? Not crime lab, not people piecing together the tail light, not the scientific law enforcement witnesses, but like law enforcement that went out to the crime scene? Or are we going to see the accident reconstructionist first? Are we going to see more of the newer experts and the injuries to John O'Keefe before we even get to law enforcement? Are we going to get to other civilians, those that were inside the house at 34 Fairview? Is the government even going to call everyone that was inside the house at 34 Fairview or not? Are we going to hear from Brian Albert, Matt McCabe, and the rest of it? And when are we going to get there? The order that they are going in is so much different. Last trial, it was like 4 witnesses, and it's like, oh, we're just going straight in chronological order. The government is doing a much different timeline in that I think they are bringing in what they consider to be their strongest evidence first. So when we get to the more difficult evidence for them, that the strongest evidence has already come in. We'll see what they decide to do. But today we're starting with scientific testimony, and then, well, I guess we'll see where we go. But I am now waiting for 3 things: the Commonwealth's accident reconstructionist, the Commonwealth's new medical expert, and when are they going to actually call former Trooper Proctor, and how are they going to explain all of that? I just want to see them try to do it. How do you work your way around the fact that he was terminated in part because of his actions in this case? We're going to just sit here together and listen to the scientific evidence and then see where we go after that. Are y'all ready? What an incredibly busy morning for day 9 of the Karen Read trial. We ended with Katie McLaughlin, the firefighter paramedic from Canton. We started the morning with the scientific witness who was on the stand under cross-examination, Hannah Knowles from the State Police Crime Lab. And then we saw Ryan Nagle testify and his ex-girlfriend Heather Maxom testify. And then we saw the friend of Julie Nagle, Ryan's little sister, Sarah Levinson, testify. We actually moved through quite a few witnesses this morning. Some of the things that stood out to me were, again, I found Ryan Nagle and Heather Maxom's testimony to be neutral and consistent with what they've said before. They saw what they saw. And what they saw is that they came to 34 Fairview to pick up Julie at the same time Karen Read's SUV was just getting to Fairview. And the timing for both of them, they said around 12:30. We know that there's a text between Julie and Ryan that was not brought up with Ryan Nagle. When he says we're here, I'm sure we will see that text when Julie testifies. We did not see it with Ryan. Ryan said that when he saw the Lexus SUV as they were leaving in Ricky's truck, that he saw a woman in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel at like 10 and 2, and that the light inside the SUV was illuminated, but he did not see anyone in the passenger seat and did not see anyone out and about, anyone walking to and from the house other than Julie, who he saw come out to Ricky's truck, and then go back into 34 Fairview. Similar testimony from Heather, except she had seen at one point a male and a female in the large black SUV, which we know is Karen Read's SUV. And then we got into the testimony from Sarah Levinson, who is friends with Brian Albert Jr. She had gone over to 34 Fairview earlier in the evening, and she talked through the evening at 34 Fairview, and then eventually knowing that she was going to leave with Julie, and then Jen McCabe saying, oh, we're celebrating Brian Albert's birthday. It's after midnight. Why don't you guys stay? We can give you a ride home later. And then when Julie's brother got there, Julie went out and said, essentially, we're staying here. We'll go home later. And then leaving with Matt McCabe and Jen McCabe for the evening, not seeing anything or anyone on the lawn. She did talk about the fact that when she was walking out of the house, she was looking at her feet and holding on to Julie Nagle so she didn't slip in the snow, but that there was still like a little bit of visible grass, but the walkways in the street were covered in snow at that point, and that they left around 1:30 in the morning or after. She, to the best of her memory, was home by 2 a.m. They left in Jen McCabe's car. She noted that Matt McCabe came out to the SUV with them, then went back into the house to get a coat and then came back. I think one of the best parts of cross-examination with Sarah Levinson is that she had been friends with Brian Albert for quite a while, had been over to his home at 34 Fairview quite a lot as they were friends, and had never seen his dog. It was really interesting questioning, and did not see his dog that night. Knew that the dog's name was Chloe, or knows now that the dog's name is Chloe, but had never seen the family dog. I think it was good questioning on cross-examination of Sarah Levinson of what she saw and what she didn't. And that, of course, they were joking about peanut butter sandwiches or whatever in the back of Jen McCabe's vehicle. And then we got into Katie McLaughlin, and it was clear when we got into cross-examination that Alan Jackson very much wanted but you know Caitlin Albert better than you said. The problem is this is a retrial. And so on direct examination, she was asked if she knows Caitlin Albert and said, yes, we know each other. We went to high school together. We have mutual friends. We are not friends. We do not have a friendship with each other, but we have mutual friends. We are in the same circle of friends, but we are not friends. And on cross, it was clear that Alan Jackson wanted to get into the fact that that relationship was closer than Katie McLaughlin said that it was. She was very consistent in saying, no, we are not friends. We have mutual friends, but we are not friends. And he did bring in her testimony in the form of impeachment from the last trial when asked about Caitlin Albert, if she said, I went to high school with someone by that name, and then got into it a bit more on cross-examination and went round and round. I think one of the most powerful parts of the cross-examination was getting the video from the dash cam and breaking down that video slowly with Katie McLaughlin as to when Karen Read said to her, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And for my memory, there was more detail about that interaction. Katie McLaughlin said that when John O'Keefe was in the back of the ambulance with firefighters Flamati and Nuttall, they were in the back of the ambulance with the door closed. And they said, can you get some more information about the patient? And she went out to talk to Karen Read and was writing on her glove, name, date of birth, etc. And that is when Karen Read was saying to her, I hit him, I hit him. And as she told that events, she said that Karen Read responded to her question, I hit him, and Jen McCabe interjected and said, what are you saying? You're talking crazy. What are you saying? And Karen's like, I hit him. And then Officer Seraph came up and said something to the effect of, and I'm summarizing because it's been a long morning in court, what are you saying? And Karen Read said to Officer Seraph, this is Katie McLaughlin's testimony, I hit him. And then Seraph said, get Goody over here, and called the sergeant over. I think Jackson did a very good job in cross slowing down that video and saying, okay, this is you and Karen. Then Jen is coming over. You're writing something on your glove. What's Seraph doing? Because Seraph is standing there like this, looking at something else in the video. And then at one point you see someone else come over. It may or may not be Goody. We haven't gotten to that testimony yet, but you see somebody else come over and he asks her, so you see this interaction with them and they don't put handcuffs on Karen Read at that point? No, they don't. And then he said, well, did you see Seraph do this? And she said, well, you should ask Seraph. And he said, we have. And she said, well, you should. And I was like, damn.
Officer Seraph just stands there and my client walks away, correct?
You'd have to talk to Officer Seraph about that.
Oh, we have.
You should.
I think it is a very good point that I hope we see the defense make more, because no one at the scene treated 34 Fairview like a crime scene. Karen Read leaves with Carrie Roberts, and law enforcement has to call Carrie and say, bring Karen Read back here. They did not put her in the back of a police car for anything other than to keep her still and warm at one point. But no one was investigating that at that point. And I think the defense can make points with that, saying, if this is a confession, which seems to be the direction the prosecution is going to argue it, if this is a confession, why didn't anyone from law enforcement treat it that way? Everyone seems to have treated it, if they heard her say, I hit him, and not what Carrie's testimony was, and what we've heard in Karen Read's statements that have been played in this case, which is, could I have hit him? Is he dead? And the rest of it. No one treated it like a confession. And in fact, on cross, it became very clear that paramedic Katie McLaughlin didn't feel comfortable following up with Karen Read about that statement and didn't think it was necessary, even though she was getting information about John O'Keefe. Presumably, information about what happened to him might be relevant to paramedics. And that question was asked too. And she said on redirect, it wasn't my place. I did not feel comfortable asking Karen Read to elaborate more about what I hit him meant. The jury's going to take that as they will. I think there was too much about the Caitlin Albert of it all. I think no one treating it like a crime scene is a good point. And we will see what the afternoon holds. We had numerous witnesses today testify that they saw the dome light on in the inside of Karen Read's vehicle. At one point saw a man inside the vehicle. At one point, no longer saw a man inside the vehicle, somewhere around 12:30 at night. And no one sees him walk across the lawn. No one sees him standing near the car. No one sees him anywhere. And when Sarah Levinson is coming out of the house, she doesn't see him on the lawn either. And at that point, there are still grass poking out of the snow. And no one sees John O'Keefe. And I think we will continue to see the defense making that point, because it's a lot of people in and around that house, and a lot of people left that house, and no one saw him.
So when you get the containers, were they plastic cups?
Yes, they were red Solo cups.
And what was the purpose of using the red Solo cups?
They were plastic. They weren't going to leak. They weren't going to get soggy. They were large. I needed a small sample. My thought was because it was frozen or coagulated, that we could
But they're plastic.
collect it, transport it, and transfer it to the crime lab, who could extract the DNA however they saw best fit.
Did the criminals come to your department, or did you bring the item to them?
They came to our department.
In addition to the glass, there was
other
plastic
stuff at your
cups
department,
with
wasn't there?
coagulated blood.
That's correct.
What did you do with those cups?
Those were placed in temporary evidence and placed in a refrigerated unit.
To carry them from Fairview to the police department, did you hold the actual cups, or did you put them in something?
They put them in a bag.
They were stacked in a bag.
They were in a
What
bag.
type of bag?
It was a craft paper bag. In this particular case, we utilized a Stop and Shop bag.
Is that any different than a bag from the police department?
This made of the same paper, craft paper, the same size and dimension, other than Stop and Shop and evidence and probably price. They're basically the same bag.
Why did you use one of those rather than a bag that said evidence on it?
I don't know where that bag came from.
Really?
I was in a personal car. Sergeant Lank was in a Tundra. If that bag is upside down, you wouldn't know it didn't say evidence on it. I'm not sure where that bag came from.
If the
And the
bag's
plastic cups, do you know what happened to those?
Yes, they were turned.
If the bag's upside down, it's just like an evidence bag for the bottom. I understand that there were things they did not have on them. But it literally says stop and shop, stop playing with me.
Isn't it true that you weren't interviewed in this case with regard to anything having to do with this case until April 3rd, 2024? Correct?
What?
Yes, we can call it an
What? Earlier I said there was little that was coming into this trial that was new. That's new information. That would have been as the last trial was starting, because the last trial started jury selection in April.
Isn't it true that you weren't interviewed in this case with regard to anything having to do with this case until April 3rd, 2024? Correct?
Yes, we can call it an interview. It's when I met with the prosecutor, yes.
We can call it an interview. It's when I met with prosecutors. So he met with prosecutors to testify. Is the first time anyone talked to him about this case?
When you say closed, you mean the top of it was rolled up?
Correct.
Or folded over?
Correct.
Okay.
It wasn't forensically sealed.
Not at that time, no.
There was no evidence tape that went on it.
Not at that time, no.
Matter of fact, the cups were still open and could slosh around. Assume they melted.
Frozen.
Yes,
There's liquid blood and liquid water, like
that's correct.
snow.
That's correct.
And you indicated that those were, at least you believe, were placed in an evidence locker, temporary evidence locker, correct?
No, the blood samples were put in a refrigerated unit.
My mistake. I thought the refrigerator was the temporary storage locker. It's different?
Yes, lockers are not refrigerated. That's where the glass would go into a locker.
Okay. This was placed into an evidence refrigerator.
That's correct.
That was to maintain the integrity of the sample, the biological sample inside the cups, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have an evidence log of that?
I don't know.
At the end of day 9, today, there are things that I just do not remember from the first trial with this witness, Lieutenant Gallagher, now retired, because the things that were surprising to me in his testimony, and Lieutenant Gallagher was the scene supervisor who showed up at 34 Fairview in the morning in his personal vehicle. He is the one that decided that the leaf blower would be the best way to get through different layers of snow without destroying anything. He decided that the only way to preserve anything biological, which was suspected blood at the scene, was to get some kind of a container. And they went across the street and asked for some kind of a container, got red Solo cups and a Stop and Shop bag, put the Solo cups with snow and presumed blood into the Stop and Shop bag, and used the leaf blower to uncover a broken drinking glass. The drinking glass was marked for identification in court, was not admitted into evidence yet because, well, the chain of custody has some questions, and it's a very secure process that this lieutenant, who is a supervisor, wasn't quite sure how that all worked, because he is not the administrative sergeant that's in charge of chain of custody, though he knew the custody very well for the drinking glass, just not for the cups that went into the evidence refrigerator. And it just seems that the drinking glass was logged into custody because this witness gave it a chain of custody number when he started testifying, 2218 PR, but said, I wouldn't have any information about that with regard to the other evidence. He said the admin sergeant would do all of that if it was to change custody to another agency. But he said during direct examination that he is the one that gave the broken drinking glass and the red Solo cups to the crime lab. He gave it to them, not the admin sergeant. So his cross-examination was conflicting with a lot of his direct examination. He also very much seemed to anticipate an underlying implication from Jackson's questions and was pushing back on the implication, not on the question asked, which I think ended up making his testimony look worse if possible, because there were times Jackson was asking what I thought were very neutral questions. And there's times that Jackson does not ask neutral questions. They are dripping with insinuation, sarcasm, or just blame. Those were not the questions that this witness was responding to in a very big way. Alan Jackson asked pretty neutral things like, did you write a report? No, I'm the supervisor. And Alan Jackson went through cross and said, okay, but normally when you're supervising, you're just making sure everybody else is doing reports. But in this case, you had the leaf blower in your hands and you were blowing snow and uncovered what ultimately is a piece of evidence that got marked into evidence. So on this day, even though you often show up as a supervisor, you were not acting in a strictly supervisory role. And he's like, I didn't write any reports. Lank wrote a report, Good wrote a report, everybody else wrote a report. When asked if he was interviewed about this case, he said no. His face said no, WTF would I be interviewed for? Because you were on scene, actively engaging with trying to find things on the scene. And his direct testimony was that he wanted to preserve things located at the scene, he said, to try to figure out what kind of medical issue John O'Keefe was having, because at this point, no one was treating it like a crime scene. And he said that at that time, there was no crime. It was not treated like a crime scene, and that is abundantly clear in this case. But as we got into cross, we got into how much this lieutenant did at the crime scene, went back to 34 Fairview when Lank interviewed Jen McCabe, talked to Seraph that day. Seraph never said to this witness that Karen Read said anything to him. And I think the order of the witnesses, with Katie McLaughlin going before this witness and this witness coming next, where Katie McLaughlin said no. Karen Read said, I hit him. And Jen McCabe interjected and said, what are you even talking about? Stop, just calm down. And then Seraph came over and said, wait, what? And Karen Read said, I hit him. And he said, go get good. Apparently, the supervisor on scene was told none of that. Seraph responded nothing that Karen Read said at the crime scene, or is alleged to have said at the crime scene. And then we learn that Gallagher is never interviewed until he sits down to talk to DA Adam Lally to prep for his testimony, which means his name has to be in a report somewhere, but to prep for his testimony before the trial last April. And at that point, it is Lally and State Trooper Tully. And at that point, Tully generates a report to disclose, and this is what I have added in from my own knowledge of this case, to disclose things that Gallagher said that were never memorialized anywhere, including that Gallagher went back out to 34 Fairview with Proctor and the CARS team, which is the crime accident reconstruction something, because they wanted to put up a drone and try to get some measurements. And it was Gallagher's job to go out and tell them where things were at the scene, including the supposed blood that they recovered, the glass pieces, and where he was told John O'Keefe was. And it became very clear that Gallagher was told where John O'Keefe was before EMS took John O'Keefe out of 34 Fairview by Lank. But Lank never saw John O'Keefe on scene either. So it's from Good to Lank and Lank to Gallagher, and then Gallagher to Proctor as to where John O'Keefe was when EMS got there, when Karen Read got there, when Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts got there. All of that got to Proctor from Gallagher, from Lank, from Good. So when we get to accident reconstruction, one of the things that's going to be incredibly important is where John O'Keefe was, how far from the curb he was, how far from the street he was. And all of the officers who are relaying that information to the lead investigator, except don't ask this witness about who's the lead investigator, because he doesn't know how any of that works. Not his pay grade, doesn't know how any of that works. I don't know how the DA's office does things. I don't know how they assign people. I don't know if Proctor's the lead investigator. I don't even know what a lead investigator is. I do not know. It is all through 5 other people saying where they believe John O'Keefe to be. But for accident reconstructionists, that information is incredibly important. The jury is just getting into the very beginning of no reports and incredulity about the report. This witness didn't say, no, I didn't write a report in hindsight. Didn't even write a supplemental report between 2022 and 2024 and 2025. He was offended that he was being asked. I have been promoted. Why would I write a report? He was so annoyed that he was being asked why he didn't write a report when he uncovered pieces of evidence that they presumed were close in location to John O'Keefe when he was located. He made the decision to get the solo cups, the Stop and Shop bag, the fucking leaf blower. Those were his command decisions. And it doesn't seem from his testimony that he communicated with Lank about Lank's report. Maybe that'll come out on redirect tomorrow because he's still on cross-examination. But this is the very first witness that the jury is seeing from Canton PD who is talking about the crime scene and how this investigation went. And I imagine that after there's been some cross-examinations where there are points that are quibbled over that might not matter, I think that at this point, the jury's like, solo cups, you say? No report? You never talked to state troopers. Oh, but you did talk to state troopers because you went out to the crime scene to show them where John O'Keefe was, even though you heard secondhand or third hand or fourth hand or whatever. But you didn't write a report for that either. And I think that the way he answered the questions is quite telling. He did say he wrote a report about metadata, but we didn't get any more information on that. I think it was a very good cross-examination because Jackson was able to step down his own frustration and let the witness's frustration on cross shine. You didn't get a lot of comments from Jackson of his own incredulousness, his own, you didn't write a report? His tone was stepped back a bit so that this witness's annoyance could be seen. Different than his cross with Katie McLaughlin, where I think at times it might not come across as smoothly because there were times that that cross got a little off, I think, track, and his own annoyance outstepped the witnesses. I just can't believe that the supervisor is like, I don't understand why it's a problem that there's no reports. If it's not documented, it makes it real hard to try to figure out what happened down the road. And even though you are the supervisor and you made a lot of the command calls, I would expect that then it would be, hey, if nothing else in this investigation, it seems that documenting that I brought back the red Solo cups and put them in the refrigerator would make sense. Documenting that I found this glass, where I found it, what it was near, why I made those choices. He said, I thought Good should take a video of me using the leaf blower because down the road, someone might question the decision to choose to use the leaf blower. So if the thought process already is, we should document this, I don't understand not going the next step and writing a supplemental report. If nothing else, you look at the victim in this case and say, you know what? Maybe we wouldn't normally document this, but it makes sense because John O'Keefe deserves answers and a thorough investigation. The lack of professionalism today has put me over the top. This sergeant and firefighter McLaughlin picked their jobs. And though I think that all victims of crime should be treated equally, I am surprised that there is not a level of care given when they discover that it is John O'Keefe. Canton knew about what happened to his sister and his brother-in-law and his taking care of his niece and nephew. They knew he was law enforcement. And the testimony this afternoon came across like they did not care about this investigation to me. Maybe that's because I've seen this trial the last time. Maybe it's because I am still blown away that there are no documents, but the testimony came across as if he just couldn't be bothered. And it's frustrating. We'll see how other law enforcement witnesses go. But this law enforcement witness, I do not think helped the prosecution move things along very well today. And the cross-examination is beginning to give the jury a little bit of a glimpse into the investigation beyond just the civilian witnesses here. Are we now getting into all of law enforcement? Or will we go back to those that were at 34 Fairview? I'm not sure, but I think the evidence really highlighted today that Lank and Good and Seraph never told the site supervisor that Karen Read said anything at all. And that Katie McLaughlin said, I'm not asking any more questions. It's not my job. Law enforcement will take care of it. And law enforcement, even after they are supposed to have heard Karen Read saying, I hit him, did not treat this like a crime scene. And that's where we're at the end of day 9. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the Law Nerd app at lawnerdapp.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Law Nerd.